In 1519, 5 ships set sail from Spain on a voyage that would change history. Leading them was Ferdinand Magellan, a seasoned sailor with a bold plan to find a western route to the fabled Spice Islands. But who was Magellan? What drove him to take such a dangerous and uncertain journey? This expedition would become one of the greatest achievements of the Age of Exploration. But it came at a high cost. Magellan's fleet faced mutiny, brutal weather, starvation, and unimaginable hardship. Not all ships would return. Not all men would survive. And Magellan himself? He would never make it back to Spain. So what happened during this 2-year odyssey? What challenges did the crew face as they crossed uncharted oceans and encountered uncharted territory? And how did Magellan, a man who had defied kings and oceans, meet his end thousands of miles from home? Welcome to Tales of History. Today, we uncover the incredible journey and tragic fate of Ferdinand Magellan. Long before he sailed under the Spanish flag, Ferdinand Magellan was a Portuguese nobleman, born in 1480 in the small northern town of Sabrosa. His family belonged to the lower ranks of the nobility, not wealthy, but connected enough to secure him a place in the royal household. There, as a young page, Magellan was exposed to the ideas that would shape his destiny: navigation, geography, and the ambitions of a maritime empire. In Magellan's youth, Portugal was a kingdom obsessed with the sea. The Age of Discovery was in full swing. Prince Henry the Navigator had already sparked a wave of exploration along Africa's coast, and Portuguese sailors were racing to dominate trade in the east. Magellan grew up surrounded by tales of gold, spices, and distant lands, stories that would become a personal obsession. At 25, Magellan joined Francisco de Almeida's fleet as part of the expedition that solidified Portuguese influence in India, marking the beginning of his long career in the Indian Ocean. For nearly a decade, he fought in naval campaigns in the Indian Ocean, including battles at Hormuz, Malacca, and Goa. He gained valuable experience in navigation and command, and perhaps most importantly, he visited the legendary Spice Islands, or as they were known then, the Moluccas. These islands, rich in cloves and nutmeg, were among the most valuable territories in the world. And while Magellan was still a minor officer, he saw firsthand the immense wealth the spice trade could bring. That memory would stay with him, and later become the foundation of his most daring proposal. But Magellan's rise through the Portuguese ranks wasn't smooth. After returning to Lisbon in 1512, he found himself sidelined. A wound from battle left him with a limp, and disputes over promotions and pay put him at odds with the crown. In 1515, after years of service, Magellan was accused of illegally trading with the Moors in Morocco, charges that, though never proven, further damaged his standing. Magellan requested a new commission, hoping to continue his service. King Manuel I refused. The rejection was personal, and it stung. After years of loyalty, Magellan was left adrift. And so, in 1517, he made a decision that would change his life and the history of the world. He left Portugal and offered his services to Portugal's rival, Spain. It was a bold and dangerous move. Under the Treaty of Tordesillas, signed in 1494, the world had been divided between Spain and Portugal. The Moluccas, the islands Magellan had seen with his own eyes, lay just on the edge of this invisible line. Magellan believed he could reach them by sailing west, proving they fell within Spain's territory. If he was right, Spain could claim a direct route to the spices, and Magellan would become a hero. In Seville, Magellan found a willing audience. Spain was eager to challenge Portugal's monopoly on the spice trade. In 1518, he presented his plan to King Charles I, soon to become Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. The young king approved the voyage, granting Magellan command of a fleet and noble titles should he succeed. For the first time in years, Magellan's vision had backing, and he was no longer an outcast, but a man entrusted with one of the most ambitious missions in Spanish history. His plan was revolutionary: sail west across the Atlantic, find a passage through South America, cross the unknown ocean beyond, and reach the Spice Islands from the opposite side of the globe. It had never been done before. No one even knew how wide the ocean was. And yet, in September 1519, Magellan and a crew of over 230 men would set sail into the unknown. But before we follow them on that journey, it's important to remember, Magellan was not merely an explorer. He was a man with something to prove, to Portugal, to Spain, to history itself. His expedition would not just be about trade or territory, it would be about redemption, legacy, and discovery. And it would cost him everything. When Ferdinand Magellan arrived in Spain in 1517, he was a man with a plan and a man with something to prove. Portugal had cast him aside. Now, he sought to turn Spain into a maritime superpower by finding a western route to the Spice Islands, bypassing the Portuguese-controlled waters of the east. If successful, his voyage would not only challenge the dominant world order, it would redefine the known limits of Earth. By his side was Rui Falero, a skilled but eccentric astronomer and cartographer. Together, they crafted a bold proposal. They would sail west across the Atlantic, search for a passage through South America, and reach the Spice Islands, what we now know as part of modern Indonesia, crossing the unexplored ocean beyond. They believed the Moluccas lay within the Spanish half of the globe, as drawn by the Treaty of Tordesillas. In 1518, Magellan and Falero brought their plan to King Charles I. The young king, just 18 years old, saw the opportunity. A successful western route to the spices would break Portugal's monopoly and bring immense wealth to the Spanish crown. Charles approved the expedition, granted Magellan authority to lead it, and gave him the title of Captain General of the Armada de Molucca. Preparations began immediately. The Spanish treasury funded the fleet, 5 ships in total: the Trinidad, San Antonio, Concepcion, Victoria, and Santiago. The ships were modest in size, designed for Atlantic travel, not global circumnavigation. Most were aging caravels and carracks, but they were all Magellan had to work with. And already, his leadership faced resistance. Many in Spain questioned why a Portuguese man had been entrusted with such an important mission. Even some of Magellan's own captains were Spanish loyalists who doubted his authority. Juan de Cartagena, captain of the San Antonio, would soon become a vocal rival. From the start, this was a divided crew, united only by royal orders and by the promise of riches. Recruitment was difficult. Of the over 230 men who signed on, many were adventurers, prisoners, or desperate sailors looking for pay and glory. Discipline would prove a constant challenge. Magellan himself was focused. He studied the latest maps and accounts of the New World. He believed a narrow strait, what he called a secret passage, cut through the southern tip of South America. Finding it was crucial. If he couldn't, the entire voyage could collapse. Just as the expedition neared departure, Magellan's partner, Rui Falero, suffered a mental breakdown. Accounts described paranoid behaviour and erratic outbursts. Falero was removed from the voyage, leaving Magellan as the sole leader of the fleet. The burden and the risk was now his alone. After more than a year of preparation, the fleet was ready. On the morning of the 20th of September, 1519, the 5 ships finally set sail from Seville. With banners flying and bells ringing, they drifted down the Guadalquivir River toward the Atlantic, watched by curious crowds who knew little of what lay ahead. They were bound for a world that had never been mapped. They carried food, weapons, spices for trade, and navigational tools, but not enough to last more than a few months. Their mission was unclear, even to the men aboard. Some believed they were heading to South America. Others were told they'd be gone no more than a year. Magellan knew better. He didn't expect to return for at least 2 years, if at all. He was sailing into the unknown, with a divided crew, limited supplies, and no guarantee that the route he imagined even existed. But if it did, he would change history. And so, the Armada de Molucca vanished beyond the horizon, into the vast Atlantic, towards South America, and into the most dangerous and extraordinary voyage the world had ever seen. On the 20th of September, 1519, Ferdinand Magellan's fleet, 5 ships, over 230 men, sailed from Seville and entered the unknown. Their destination was the fabled Spice Islands, but first they had to cross the vast Atlantic Ocean, with no guarantee that a western passage even existed. By late September, the fleet reached the Canary Islands, where they took on final supplies. From there, they turned southwest toward the coast of South America. The sea was rough, the winds unpredictable, and tempers on board were already showing signs of strain. The cultural divide between Magellan's Portuguese officers and his Spanish captains would soon boil over. In December 1519, the fleet reached the coast of present-day Brazil, anchoring in Guanabara Bay. The landscape was lush and inviting, and contact with indigenous peoples was peaceful, at least at first. But Magellan knew they couldn't linger. He was searching for something else, the secret passage through the continent. They sailed southward, hugging the uncharted coast. Weeks turned into months. They reached the mouth of the Rio de la Plata, hoping it might be the route west. It wasn't. The river narrowed and twisted inland. Disappointment set in, and morale began to collapse. It was here that tension turned to outright rebellion. 3 Spanish captains, Juan de Cartagena, Gaspar de Quesada, and Luis de Mendoza, launched a mutiny against Magellan. They accused him of favoritism, incompetence, and endangering the fleet. In the freezing Patagonian port of San Julian, the mutiny came to a head. Magellan acted swiftly and decisively. He recaptured the mutinous ships, executed Quesada, and marooned Cartagena on a barren coast. Mendoza was killed during the uprising. Magellan had made it clear. Discipline would be enforced at any cost, but the cost was high. The seeds of distrust were now sown deep among the surviving officers. The Patagonian winter was brutal. The crew built shelters and hunted local wildlife to survive. Food was scarce, and frostbite was common. Morale teetered on collapse. Many believed the voyage was cursed, and that Magellan's vision of a western passage was no more than a fool's errand. But Magellan remained determined. Despite every setback, he pushed forward. He knew the strait had to exist, and continued the expedition. And in October 1520, over a year since leaving Spain, his persistence was rewarded. At the southern tip of the continent, near the edge of the world, the fleet found a narrow, twisting waterway. It cut through the mountains and glaciers of what would later be called Tierra del Fuego. Magellan believed this was the passage, the gateway to the Western Ocean. He had been right. But not all would follow. The San Antonio, the fleet's largest and best-stocked ship, deserted during the passage. Its captain, Esteban Gomez, turned back towards Spain, taking critical supplies and maps with him. Magellan had no choice but to continue with 4 ships and shrinking hope. But it didn't stop them. By November 1520, the remaining ships emerged from the strait into an ocean so calm that Magellan named it Mar Pacifico, the Peaceful Sea. What lay ahead, though, would be anything but peaceful. The first year of the expedition had tested Magellan's resolve, broken loyalties, and claimed the lives of men who once called him captain. Yet against all odds, he had found the passage no European had ever seen, and stepped into a vast ocean no one truly understood. The journey was far from over. In fact, its hardest chapter was still to come. Ahead lay starvation, storms, strange lands, and deadly encounters that would decide the fate of the entire expedition. The Pacific would not be as peaceful as its name suggested. What happened after they crossed into the Pacific? How far would they go, and how many would survive? And how did Ferdinand Magellan, the man who led them into history, meet his end on the far side of the world? Find out in part 2 of this series. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the rest of this incredible journey.